today we're going to get a little more practical. Remember, we're going to do a move, right? And you want to collect requirements. Maybe you have a team. Maybe you don't have a team. You could use any of these techniques to go and collect requirements. The more you practice them, the better you get. And eventually it becomes natural to you. I think practice makes instinct. Okay? The more you do something, the more it becomes natural to you to do it by instinct. The first time around, it feels a bit weird, strange that you do this, but eventually you get used to it. So let's take a look at all these techniques. I have, a page or two on each. So we're going to go through them in a fast fashion. Some of them you understand, like brainstorming. Remember, I brought up the concept of brainstorming before, and many people are familiar with brainstorming. But the one thing that we need to know that separates this brainstorming from, let's say, workshops or others is that you cannot criticize. So if you're doing a brainstorming session and you called everybody into this session and said, we want to discuss, well, actually, we're not going to discuss, we want to come up with the requirements for our project. They should know from the beginning that this is not a place to be arguing or analyzing. We just want the ideas, okay? And I know that I've used tools that allow us to work online without people, people can collaborate without really arguing or without even having the chance to argue about anything. I'm sure there's a few others, but groupmap.com, I'm not promoting them or anything, but GroupMap, it only works with a trial membership, and I've used all of my trial memberships, but it allows people to participate. So these will eliminate a lot of the problems when you're trying to do brainstorming. So you give them the pin, and everybody will log in using that pin, and then we can do brainstorming. Where is the brainstorming screenshot? It does risk, it does a lot of things. Okay, I cannot see it here, but I know it has brainstorming. And so what it allows you to do is that people can now log in with the pin, and they can put in their ideas or the requirements as far as they know. Bring everybody into the room and say, okay, this is what we want to discuss. Put your ideas into this tool, and then they will do it. And then once everybody is done, so nobody gets to see the other person's ideas. This way, nobody comments on the other person's ideas. You don't want people to comment on others who are trying to suggest that some things are requirements. Once everybody is done, you click a button and they can see everybody's requirements, but they won't see a name. So they don't really know who actually submitted the requirements. Then you can ask them to go and rate these requirements, every one of the requirements, get to rate them from low to high. There's like a bar where you can slide it, and they will slide it. Once everybody is done, see here it says suggest methodology to run your brainstorming session. Once everybody is done, you click the button and it will give you the average rating for all of the requirements, and it will rank them from the highest to the lowest. This allows you for the fastest way. I'm not saying you have to use these. Obviously, you can do it differently. You could ask people to just submit them to you. They can just give you the requirements. I can't click on this. They can just give you the requirements, and you can just put them together into one Excel and ask them to rate it. They brainstorm, then they rate, then we can take action on these requirements. So you could use that, and don't let people shoot down other people's ideas. Brainstorming says just freely discuss what you think are the requirements. So right now, if I said we want to collect the requirements for our project, I will use a document like this Excel sheet, and I'll say I need to get your requirements, and you can give me requirements. If immediately I start to stop you, or somebody comments on your, the chat that you put and say this is a requirement, it may discourage you from continuing your requirements. So it is best to not comment on people's requirements during a brainstorming session. Let them finish all of what they want to say, and then we can analyze them afterwards. I could use interviews by going to specific people, which is how most people do it. We have our list of stakeholders. We can schedule time with them, meet with them, and ask them if they have any specific requirements that pertain to them, or for the things, the objects that they have, equipment they may have, space they need, location that they need to be in. You could ask about a lot of these things, but we also will collect safety requirements and so on. We'll collect the landlord's requirements. We'll collect budgetary requirements. We'll take requirements from the movers, from individual employees. There are many requirements we need to collect, and we have to go and interview and talk to these people and understand. We could do focus groups. These are like workshops. Workshops, let me just go back one screen here. See, we have workshops, forget the JAD part, but workshops and focus groups, these are almost the same, except in workshops, you're mixing everybody and they get to talk and analyze, which is what makes it different from brainstorming. In brainstorming, no analysis, just give me the ideas, but don't analyze. Workshop, you can analyze. Focus group is the same like a workshop, except it's not a mix of people. It's just one department or one group of people. So imagine you're only sitting with IT department. It's easier to talk with them and get their requirements. And it's easier than if you mix IT with HR and finance all together. You know, IT and finance, they're not going to get along. Finance is trying to save money. IT is saying you're not thinking in the right direction. Money is not everything that we focus on. So you do focus group. It's a group that is focused on only one thing, and then you get their requirements. We'll practice with some requirements together. You could also do surveys or questionnaires. Surveys is to get, see, surveys, you need to have a question and several answers. So you have to know the answers, the options. So if you want to ask people, for example, what would be a survey question for a move? You know, I could ask, how many things do you have plugged into electricity? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want to see the majority what they have, right? Or I could ask them, where would you prefer to be? Close to the entrance, close to the window, close to the bathroom, close to the pantry. You know, you could ask these questions, or you could skip surveys altogether. You may not do surveys and don't give them an option. But you could do questionnaires to your senior management. See, small difference between questionnaires and surveys. Questionnaires can sometimes be open-ended, which means you ask a question like, you know, what features should your space have? And, you know, that's leaving it open for them to say whatever they want to say, which could be a lot of information. When you do surveys, you limit the answers, right? You say, you ask the question, you put specific answers. So they can only choose from these answers. It's not really open-ended. Open-ended questionnaires are not a good idea if you have a lot of stakeholders. It's only good for a handful, like I really mean 5 or less senior managers. Other than that, do not do questionnaires. Questionnaires such as what sorts of you know, energizing artifacts or, you know, decoration should we have? That's like a very open-ended question, and that would, you know, they could come up with a lot of things. So choose questionnaires only for small groups of people, mostly for senior managers, surveys for a large group of people, but you have to prepare the answers so they can select from them. Benchmarking, you can look at how others have done it. You can benchmark from the mover. The mover will tell you that usually when a company that is 100 people is moving, these are some of the things that are required, or this is what we would recommend that you do. You can benchmark against best practices if you know somebody else has done it. If you know your sister company has already done a move, you can also check with them on what they did, and those will give you ideas for what is required on your own project. You could review documentation of the current layout of your organization. You could look at the tables, the sizes. You can look at the org chart to know management from others and everything. And based on what you see in the documentation, you'll be able to understand some of the requirements that need to be implemented in this specific move. And these could be contracts, by the way, the documentation. You can do lessons learned. So if you have lessons learned, you know, I mean, you're not moving every day or every month, but, you know, in IT, there are things they do, you know, almost all the time. So they could go with lessons learned from a previous project that is similar and try to extract some of these requirements so that they can apply them on their own project. Documents we typically could review include the templates that were used previously, or maybe the sample templates like the ones I'm sharing. When I share a ready template, it makes it easy for you to learn and use whatever. That's what lessons learned is. This is why documents need to be saved. If you have templates that have been used, like checklists that have been used for moves, usually the movers might give you some of these things if they are professional. But if you have templates for a move, that what things should you check, what things should you back up, how you should, you know, what things you should buy, then those can be very good to use. It will guide you on your own. Organizational process assets, maybe they have procedures in the organization. I know we just don't want to move, but you know, in other instances, other types of projects, there are guidelines that the organization has been following for a long time, or procedures or policies, and those you need to review these things and try to understand which ones apply. You know, there could be some safety guidelines, privacy guidelines, or rules that you will need to implement in your own project. And so you will go and review these things so that you have it all covered. Mind maps, we've talked about before. It looks something like this, where you start with, you know, this is our move, and then let's see what are the sub branches of it. So one sub branch of the move could be the actual physical move of the, you know, the furniture and such. The other could be the IT aspect. This could be legal and logistics. This could be I don't know, administrative, like procurement and so on. And this could be the people side of things, you know, and then we look at, from the people side of thing, you know, what do we need to do to notify them, or so on. So we can branch it out, and for every one of these, we need to have a requirement. You could also use affinity diagrams. They're called affinity diagrams, but they don't look like diagrams. They look like this. Imagine you were still able to go to work and you're able to work in a workshop setting. You could ask the organization, you could ask the team members to write one requirement on a post-it note. Like every post-it note will have one requirement, and it could be different topics pertaining to the same thing, like the move. So some may be writing safety requirements, some will talk about labeling requirement, some will talk about packing requirements, and they will write only one requirement per post-it note. And then the first person walks up to the wall and they will put their own post-it note. And the second, they may have, you know, I may have written 7 or 8 different requirements. So I'll go put the first post-it note, and then I will look at the other requirement that I have and see if it's, you know, similar in nature or topic to this one. I put it next to it. If it's different, I create a different category. You see here on the screen in the picture, different categories are being created by type of requirement. Then the next person comes in, and then as a group, we can work like together, and every person tries to match their requirement to the other requirements. They don't have to be perfectly similar, but they have to be of a similar nature, maybe discussing the same thing. If it's about packing, okay, then I'll put it next to the ones related to packing. Labeling, I put it next to labeling. Maybe labeling actually sits with the packing because we pack and then we label it, right? So it could also be supplies related to packing, for example. So we'll put them all together. At the end, once you've done this affinity exercise, you're going to have a lot of nicely grouped requirements on the wall, and that tells you what your requirements are. So it is a nice technique you can use for a group activity. I mentioned that when you do brainstorming, you don't allow people to criticize, and so if you don't want to allow people to criticize, there's always a chance somebody is going to give you a requirement that doesn't make sense. Somebody, for example, saying every box must be sitting on its own wheels so we can roll it around. Or maybe someone saying the packing needs to happen after hours. Well, sometimes, yeah, that makes sense, but what if the others think, no, we should rush it and we should do it even during work hours, maybe appointed day like a Thursday to do it. You know, people have different requirements that they would suggest, and so you may want to vote on these requirements. So this nominal group technique is also known as voting, where you take everybody's requirements either from a brainstorming session or workshop, put them on the wall like on Excel, project it, and let people, or maybe email it to them and let them vote on it, or put it on some online tool and let them vote on the requirements. Then you can take the overall average requirement of these, and then you see which of the requirements rank really high according to people's opinions, and those are the ones that you try to put into your project. Observation, conversation, you can just walk around, observe, and there are 2 ways to observe. I mean, you could observe and ask questions. This is called active observation, or you can observe and not ask, just take notes, which is called passive observation. Passive means I'm leaving people alone, I'm just watching so that I can see the spaces needed and everything. Active, I could ask people, why do you have your lamp over here? Is the light here not enough? Do you really need this? Why do you have this kind of a chair? Would a different chair work? and I noticed that you do this on, you have this item under the desk. Is this really essential? So this is when you do an active observation. Conversation would be, you do it as, along with when you're doing the observation. You ask, you talk. Facilitation is used for workshops. I listed a few things: JAD, QFD, AEIOU, no, those are vowels. JAD is Joint Application Design. We use that in the military. Once I worked for a couple of years in a military facility, and there were places obviously I didn't have access to. They didn't trust me. I didn't have access to, but I could see that the military and this organization, which was semi-government, they were working on a design together. So it's called Joint Application Design. And when they're sitting in the same lab, they test out different requirements. It gives them better results, faster results. This one stands for Quality Function Design. It's also used for coming up with the best qualities or the best functions that would give the quality standards that they're looking for. But anyways, all I want you to know is that these are workshops and could involve a mix of people to try to come up with the requirements. We also have these context diagrams, and BAs, they use this a lot. When you're trying to analyze a business system like process, equipment, computer system, and so on, and how people and other systems interact with it, you'll create something that looks like a map, but it's just showing you how this thing is sitting in context with the environment. And that's going to generate some requirements, either interface requirements, access requirements, positioning requirements, and so on, because that's needed for the context of its usage or its placement. So we could use these maps to understand requirements. We could use prototypes by sampling something, whether it is a sketch, Photoshop, looking at the picture online that is similar to it. We might be able to extract some of these requirements. Sometimes you cannot until you've tested it out. So you might have a mock-up or a demo, something that gives you an idea of it so that you can understand the requirements. At the end, once you've used, different sets of requirements, well, let me ask you, which of these techniques that we discussed here or that I discussed have you used? Which one do you normally use to collect your requirements? So we use interviews, lessons. Yeah, these, the most common is actually interviews and brainstorming session. Only problem is that people will mix brainstorming with workshops. They don't give time for people to actually give their ideas. I like to use process maps. If I map out my process and I say, this is how something is happening, and I follow this along the way, and I ask myself, what happens at every stage here along the process. I can understand the requirements, like how does the approval happen, how, for example, is the announcement made, how is this done, all the hows that I have, all the questions that I have, I can put them on a process and try to understand along the way, and that would clarify it for me. So I could use a process map to understand it. So eventually everything goes on a requirements document. This is a huge requirements document. It doesn't have to be huge, but in it I have what is the requirement from the stakeholder requirement, what are the details of it. So in this instance, you could have just one box, not just two. You don't need to have two, but I sometimes will use two, because sometimes I get a high level requirement and then I get the details. So if somebody says we need to have, if they say we need to have 3 outlets for every person for electricity, I may have additional details on why they need 3 outlets or the specifics of these 3 outlets, and then I could put those there. If they say we need to have a whiteboard in the office, I may have also additional details. I may collect additional details on dimensions like size, location of that whiteboard. So, sometimes they will state things, but, there's a lot more specifics associated with it, so you can put in the details. You can categorize the requirements. You can name the stakeholder who gave the requirement, their contact details, maybe what was their concern when they suggested it, what is the priority of the requirement, what phase does this requirement relate to, what is the acceptance criteria. Now, you don't have to put this all the time, but I sometimes put acceptance criteria for a requirement, because sometimes I'm thinking it's one thing and then the stakeholder is thinking something else. So then I need to clarify, and I'll ask them, so if it looks like this or if it acts like this, is that going to be acceptable? If they say yes, then that's the acceptance criteria. Because sometimes there are disagreements. People say one thing and then when you deliver it, they are complaining that this is not what they were thinking. So for those sticky things that you know could be problematic, you want to get acceptance criteria. Right? And then do you have any dependencies between these requirements? Some requirements have dependencies, meaning maybe one is a parent requirement, like wireless. Wireless is a parent requirement. The router, the account from the telecom, these are separate requirements. The cable that comes into the property, that's a requirement. So there are sub or child requirements that overall will give you one high-level requirement, which is wireless in the building, right? So since these requirements will be connected, I would identify them as a parent and subset, or parent and child, and children. This way, if I ever make a change later on and touch any of these requirements, I need to know what it could affect. So if I go remove the router, then obviously wireless will be affected. If they don't need wireless in the whole building, then we don't need a router. So it's good to know the dependencies between them. If you're using a projector, you will need a screen. So by not having a screen, you're going to rely on the wall, which may not always be a good idea. So you need to know which requirements are dependent, and that's why I put it there. Mind you, all of this is really optional. You don't have to do it as it shows here. You need just the minimal information. I could also come up with a strategy for a category of requirements. Maybe I want to outsource them. So that would be the strategy. Who's responsible to take care of the requirement? And did this requirement eventually get approved by my sponsor? Just because I'm collecting all these requirements from different stakeholders does not mean that they've been approved yet. You know, because people are going to give you different wish list type of requirements. They may be hoping that it will be approved. Maybe some of them are telling you I should be by the window, all right? Or I need a place for my plant to grow. You know, maybe they bring in a plant. And then maybe they should be fired, them and the plant. Who knows if they're asking for too much, if they're too picky. I need a recliner chair since we're moving, you know, I'm tired of the solid chair that I have. They could give you many, many requirements. And you just need to understand, would your management approve it? Would your sponsor approve that? And so you want to get approvals. Maybe if later on the requirements change, you want to take some notes regarding that change. So that is the visual that I have here. And I have this Excel sheet that we could use. This is a simplified version of it, just stating the requirement, category of the requirement, who wants it, and which WBS we will relate this to. Now, it's too soon to be talking about WBS, but it's not too soon to be naming requirements. Okay, so if we want, we could actually create something similar to a mind map. I mean, what I'm trying to do is I want to cover all areas of the requirements. So I could start with the WBS. I know you're not familiar with WBS. Let me tell you how these things work. Let me create a project. So I'm going to use a free software called Project Libre, which I downloaded freely from the internet. I'm going to create a project, and it's going to give me something like this. I'm going to say company move, and I'm going to be the project manager. So this is for our company move of 100 workstations from building A to let's call this Superman building. And there's a show I was watching on Netflix, from the Arrow building to Superman building. So we're gonna move between different buildings. I'm gonna hit OK, and what it did was, I'm gonna drag it out. It created something that looks like MS Project. Okay. See, requirements gathering. If you want to do it using mind maps, if you want to get the main categories and then start collecting requirements, you may have to just create WBSs to start with. So I know I have a section on WBS, but I just feel it could just work here. Whole project. This is whole move project. So this is the whole project. right? And then underneath that, I want to think, what are the pieces of my project? And the pieces of my project is the WBS, the work breakdown structure. So we will discuss it now and then we'll skip it later. So what are the pieces? There's actual moving, which I'm gonna say includes the packing. There's the unpacking. There's also administrative things that need to be done. There's also, let's see, legal aspects that we need to consider. And then maybe there's logistics that we need to consider. And then so legal would be like lease related to our location, to the new location. And then there's the IT work, right? That needs to happen. I'm trying to think what are the big pieces of me doing a move. It's always good to have one that says project management requirements. So project management, this would be our notifications or communications that need to happen, so, things we may need to document and so on. So I'm just going to leave a section for project management. And I want to assume that in the actual moving, there will be a few activities there. So I'm just going to say activity 1 for now, activity 2. We can adjust these later, activity 3, activity 4. Mind you, you cannot duplicate the activity names. Activity 5, activity 6, activity 7. You'll see it's going to have a hierarchy soon. Activity 8, activity 9. When I do the hierarchy, it will be like magic. Activity 10. Activity 11. Now, there could be more than that, but I'm just putting these for now. And this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to select all of these, and then I'm going to indent. So let's see, task. I'm going to indent them. So what I did was now all of these fall under the whole move project. And then I'm going to do the same thing with these and indent them. And so that way, activity 1 and 2 are under the actual moving, and activity 3 and 4 will be under administrative and so on. So that's what I'm going to do with all. And then what I'm going to do, see, it gives you minuses here. So if I just want to see the WBS view, I'm going to just shrink these, collapse them. That's what it's called, collapse. Click here. It will hide them. And now all I have is the big sections of my move project. I can click here, WBS, and voila, we have a WBS. Okay. So I just created a WBS. So if I want to collect my requirements, I am probably, let's say I have a team and this is a big project, I'm probably going to divide the team and say, I want people to deal with the actual moving requirements, including the packing, the movers, and I want people to deal with the administrative things. And under administrative, there's vendor management and there's payments that we need to deal with. And then legal could have, for example, lease and others. So it's similar to mind mapping, is just a hierarchy that I'm creating. And then I can have my team help me and figure out the requirements for these. By the way, if you go look at the WBS now, you see administrative is broken down into 2 subsections. It's really beautiful when we create these things. It makes it easy, makes us look more professional anyways. So what I want to do is I want to use this as a template, a starting point for us to be able to create the requirements, right? I want to be able to put together some requirements associated with this one project. And so I want to list them here. Something needed on the project. Mind you, when we write requirements, it needs to have this format. Take a look at this. Something about the project must be whatever, or be able to do something. As an example, the can must be cylindrical and similar to the latest Red Bull cans, okay? Or the packaging must have options for multi-can, 6, 12, and 24 can boxes. Or there must be at least 3 sizes of digital banner ads, including the following sizes. These are examples, obviously, from a different project. But usually, the object of your requirements, you should go watch my video to learn how to do this. The object of your requirement should be the beginning. So don't just say the move, the move, the move. You know, the whole project's about the move. So you can say the space for every cubicle must be, you know, it always does something. The object of your requirement must be, or must have, or must include. It's must something. It has to have the word must. It is essential that it has the word must. If you're not going to use the word must, you use the word shall. And that tells you that It has to. It's not an option. If you say it should, then you are leaving people with an option to decide whether they want or not want to do that. And we don't want that. We want the requirements to be stated clearly as a must. It has to be in order. It has to be very assertive and clear as to what we're looking for. There cannot be vague requirements. Again, watch that video that I have on my channel, and you will learn like the qualities of requirements that you need to write. What we need to do right now is we need to develop, I'm going to hide this for now, hide that one line. I want us to quickly list some requirements for our project, for the move, but I want you to keep in mind the following that you see on the screen, right? So I'm going to put this up here and use what you see on the left as our guide to remind us of different things that we might need to consider in the, oh, we left out one thing important here, construction. You know, there's the other place, there's construction and testing and everything. So let's just make an attempt at putting some requirements together. I'm looking at the list on the left. There's the actual moving, there's the new building setup, project management activities we might do, IT, logistics, legal, and I just want to make sure you know how to name a few requirements. This is a requirement. So my object of the requirement is the physical move must be complete, and I put the date. Must is the most important word here. Not the most important word, but it has to be in the statement. The physical move must be completed by August 15th. Packing of personal desk items must be done by employees. We don't say all employees must pack their own items because the concern is not the all employees. The concern is packing of the desk. Okay, access cards must be provided to each employee. Okay, I want the first thing that someone reads to be the item that I'm concerned about. Network must be ready by August 10. So IT network must be fully ready, meaning tested, okay, by August 10th. The move must happen weekends. Movers must show proof of insurance for the move. Okay, for the move. So they need to show us proof of insurance for the move. Maybe we'll require it of them. Movers must be established and licensed in, you know, whatever our area is, right? So I don't want people that, you know, come from a different place that don't care. Movers must bring their own moving equipment. We don't want to supply them with anything from a facilities or anything. Okay, all network accesses that we have in current office must also be accessible in new building. We don't want someone telling us later, sorry, in this building we don't have these things or the network doesn't support that. There must be a minimum of 3 electrical outlets per desk. How about that? See, what I'm trying to teach you here with this exercise is to avoid being general or vague. When you say building layout must be ready, it might be ready next year. So that's not specific. Requirements need to be very specific. Maybe you need to say that the new building layout must be prepared and approved by a specific date. There must be a minimum of 3 electrical outlets per desk. Would be a nicer one than ensure there's electric outlets and working, because, you know, somebody's opinion of what is, you know, electrical outlets and sufficient might be different from yours. So you want something more specific. All personal non-essential items must be cleared from premises by August 10th. Okay. I want them to remove them. There must be a maximum of 4 employees in a single office. Mind you that it is always the object of your requirement that you put. The concern is that we want them to have packed by a specific date. Employees must complete on packing no later than August 9th, for example. These are very specific orders. Do you understand? This is how we write requirements. If you don't write it this way, you leave it wide open for people to tell you that, well, I thought you meant this. So I want to make sure you know how to write requirements. Okay. If I just say new layout, what about the layout that I'm concerned about? Something that says no more than 4 workstations to every office. This is a requirement. This is a good one. It's very specific. Personal non-essential items must be cleared from premises, or all employees must remove personal items, by this date. And those are considered good requirements. It's always going to be the thing that I want to discuss must meet the following criteria. That's how requirements are written. Okay. If you wanted to buy, again, I was trying to give an example of maybe you're trying to buy a mobile phone, right? If you just tell someone that if you go to the store and say, I want a nice mobile phone, they're going to show you probably the most expensive one. But if you say the cost of the phone cannot be more than, for example, $500, then you've just restricted it to a certain number. And the color of the phone must be blue on the outside. Okay. And then you will say, for example, the screen size must be this. That's very specific and can help the salesperson pick out items that match. And if you make it really complicated, then you will not get a phone because you were just overly specific and there was no phone that would meet all of your requirements. So I don't know if there's any critical requirement that we left out. I'm sure these will not be all of the requirements. We didn't even discuss what security, safety, procedures will be important. But usually we look at this hierarchy on the left and we start to identify requirements. That's why we do these brainstorming sessions. We say, all right, we need to think about requirements for the actual moving activities, like, packing tape, for example. All boxes must be labeled with employee's name and new desk location. Okay, so we want to know where it's going to end up, the location, and for whom. Okay, so this is a very specific requirement. I'm talking about the boxes. Must be labeled with employee's name and new desk location. So you get the concept of requirements. If you go into an interview and they tell you you need to wear a tie, does any tie work or does a specific tie work? For example, this is if you want to wear a tie. Right? If they tell you make sure it's a professional tie, it's really not specific. But if they tell you just stick with dark blue, for example, dark blue tie, and make sure it's above the waist. That's more specific, okay? Or no wider than, I don't know, 1.5 inches. That would be very specific. That's much better than just leaving you in the dark and saying, make sure you have a good tie. There are places that say, dress accordingly, and, people's opinion of accordingly varies a lot. So that's what requirements are. And that ends this one portion of the training. So now, if you have the requirements and you had the charter, do you think the scope is almost complete?